Nurse Theorists, Portraits of Excellence. In this edition, we feature Dr. Imogene King.
I was born in West Point, Iowa, and when the Depression came in 1929, my family moved to Fort Madison, which was 9 miles away, and I spent the rest of my growing up years in Fort Madison, Iowa. I have an older brother who is firstborn and a sister next, and I'm the baby of the family. My brother taught me all the kinds of ball playing that I wanted to play, like golf and tennis, and my sister was always the gracious, lovely lady in the house and taught me good manners and was a real role model for me.
We were more than sisters. We were really good friends, and as we were growing up, we shared a room and, of course, got into the quarrels and squabbles that sisters do. After she left home, when she'd come back, we still remained very close, and we think she's the greatest. She has a heart of gold. There isn't anything she wouldn't do for us, and I'm sure students.
I worked for 2 years as a secretary after high school at the W.A. Schaefer Pen Company. And then the war broke out, World War II, and everybody seemed to want to do their bit for the war effort, and I went into a school of nursing because they were crying for nurses for the services, and of course you had to have at least a diploma. And so I went to St. John's Hospital School of Nursing in St. Louis. We had marvelous teachers, and the director of nursing of our school had identified about 4 of us in my graduating class and talked to us individually and said that we should go right on to the university to get our bachelor's degree. And if you can believe this, in 1945, she had vision. She said, you know, your diploma is not going to mean too much within the next 5 years or more, that you're really going to have a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Well, I went to school at St. Louis U. I attended there from 46 to 48 and received a bachelor's degree in June of 48. And one of the supervisors at St. John's had become the new director of nursing. And it was interesting. She and I had an education course together, and she asked me what I was going to do when I finished, and I told her I hadn't really decided, and she asked me to come for an interview. That post-World War II, she thought that the diploma school should begin to appoint nurses as the major teachers. You know, previous to this, the physicians taught a lot of the nursing students in these diploma schools. And so she decided that she would like to have some qualified nursing instructors, and she asked me if I'd be there first. So I became one of their first lay clinical instructors when I graduated. While I was teaching, it dawned on me that I needed more knowledge about education and about teaching and learning. I felt that I was continuing my knowledge in nursing because, again, in that period, we not only were the clinical instructor, but we were also practicing nursing at the same time. And so I decided that I could probably complete a master's part-time. So in 1955, I enrolled at St. Louis University again because they had a really respectable master's program, and chose nursing administration at the master's level as part of the major concentration. When I was in the master's program, I was reading the nursing literature and ran into several articles by Dr. Mildred Montag. I thought, if I want to get a doctor's degree, I want to go where the action is and where the people are doing the research. And so I thought, I think I'd like to have that person be my advisor as a doctoral student. And I applied to Teachers College and was admitted. Well, I didn't have quite enough money to go, and so I worked another year. I spent a year in Chicago at a hospital school, and then went on to Teachers College in 1959. And I had Mildred Montag as my advisor, and the first meeting with her, I had my whole program through graduation planned, and she looked at me and she said, oh, you really have your goals set, do you? And I said, yes, I have exactly 2 years to do this, and I have exactly this much money. And she said, I will try to facilitate your goal. And she did. Following my graduation from Teachers College, I started at Loyola. I was the first earned doctorate on the faculty. We were the first program in the country to have a curriculum based on a conceptual framework designed by a nurse. When I was in my 5th year at Loyola, I went to the federal government. Then it was the Department of Health Education Welfare, and the Division of Nursing was one of 4 divisions, and the research branch was one of the branches. So I worked with Faye Abdullah and became the assistant chief of the branch for 2 years. At that point, though, when I went to Washington, I was under contract, by the way, to publish a theory book for John Wiley and Company. They had just gotten into the business of nursing techs in higher education. And Mildred Montag happened to be one of their advisors, and they asked her for 4 names of nurses around the country who could write the books they wanted, and she suggested me as one of them. So that's when I started to write my first theory book. So I spent 2 years and had a nice experience, but I really found out I was destined for the university system. So while I was there, I met a couple of people from Ohio State who had sent research grants in. Was really impressed with the campus and the people there. I went a couple of times for interviews and was appointed director of the School of Nursing at Ohio State then, and started there in 1968. The Department of Defense had what they called a very important committee, but it was made up of 48 women. It was started when the Secretary of Defense around 1951 or 2 decided he needed an advisory committee on women in the services. I was invited to become a member of this committee. I think it was 1972, just before I left Ohio State. The second year I was on the committee, we were invited to the White House, and President Nixon was president then, and Pat Nixon had a receiving line for us, and she was just one of the most gracious, lovely ladies I think I've ever met. But 4 years of administration, I realized that was not going to be the rest of my career. I just didn't want to give that kind of time. So I went back to Loyola, and I spent the next 8 years. When I decided to move to Florida, I left Loyola and moved to Florida in 1980. I was appointed a full professor at the University of South Florida College of Nursing. It's the youngest university in the country, and it's the youngest program in nursing in the country. I teach graduate students primarily. I guest lecture in the undergraduate program. Graduate students I find delightful. They're raising really critical questions about their profession, and they're in graduate school, I think, to really increase their knowledge, most of them tell me, and then to try to set a goal for themselves as a career.
I think if there were one thing I would like people to know about Dr. King, is not only is she a theorist in nursing, but she understands theory. And she understands theory construction and the philosophy of science and the philosophy that nursing is based on. She is truly a scholar in her own right, not only as far as research, but also as a theorist. And I think that's really important, that she understands not only her own theory, but she understands the components of theory and what it should be. She is very stimulating. She's very different than many other faculty members.
Dr. King discussed her interacting systems framework and theory of goal attainment with Dr. Jacqueline Fawcett at the Hyatt Regency West Shore in Tampa, Florida.
Imogene, I'd like to thank you so very much for agreeing to do this interview. It's an honor to have the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this, and it's fun for me, as you know, because in 1977 we first met, and I think sparked a conference that the National League for Nursing was holding.
Yes. I'd like to start the interview by asking you what the motivation was for your publication of the conceptual framework of interacting systems, and later on, the theory of goal attainment.
I think the primary reason was a position that I was holding at the time to begin to develop a new master's program. And you know, in the early 60s, there were only about 30 accredited master's programs in the country. And I was aware of the explosion of knowledge. And I used to think, how does one select out essential content for master's students? And this was the old medical surgical nursing program. And so I decided that because we also were going to teach some research, that I needed to get some studies in the library for the students so they would be able to read some nursing research. So I wrote a letter to the deans and directors of graduate programs in the country and asked for their theses, titles, and dissertations. And I received a real response within a matter of 2 weeks from most of them. And I spotted a dissertation at UCLA by a nurse called The Identification of a Basis for Nursing Practice, a Theoretical Basis for Nursing Practice, which was Peg Kaufman's dissertation. So Lula Hassenplug, you know, was the dean there, and so I called her and said, could I get a copy? She told me how to do it through their library, and in those days you could get copies from libraries. So I received the copy and read it, and we decided to use that as our conceptual framework for a new master's program. It was my idea that we should not have more of the same, that we should look to the future and have a little vision on the type of programs. And the interesting thing, there were 3 concepts in the dissertation that she turned into an open-ended model, and was time, stress, and perception. And that was one of the influencing factors in my own thinking. because she had integrated these concepts so well, and she gleaned them out of the nursing literature, which made them fairly valid, I thought. And then I was in touch with Peg for the next few years and had hoped that she might continue to test her ideas, but she didn't. But then I had some Yale theses that were done when Ida Orlando was there, and she had published her book in 1961 on the dynamic nurse-patient relationship, in which she said she had a theory. And so we had 3 of their theses that were testing Ida Orlando's ideas. So our students were really excited about this new look. So we had some resources, and then of course we had Hildegard Peplau's book, which was another. And I think this all started when I finished at Teachers College. Actually, it started a long time before that. In my ed psych course as an undergraduate student, I was fascinated with learning theories and had continued to develop my own idea about learning over the years, so that I think I had a fairly good theoretical base from an undergraduate program. And then in trying to develop a new master's program for the future, we decided to have a conceptual framework and used the one designed by Peg. And it seemed to work very well.
How then did your work evolve from the earlier work by Peg Kaufman?
John Wiley and company wanted to publish textbooks for higher education for nursing, and so they'd contacted me, and I told them about my ideas, that I would like to develop a book that would really expand on a conceptual framework for nursing. So they signed me to a contract, which I found interesting, and it took me about 4 years because I'd changed jobs in the meantime, until I really gelled what I thought was a conceptual framework, and I was very close, I thought, to developing a theory from it, but the manuscript had to be turned in, as you know from publishing. And so the manuscript, that's why the title was what it was. It was Toward a Theory for Nursing.
And that was in 1971.
1971. I was moving in the direction of a theory.
Going then from the 1971 book, Toward a Theory for Nursing, to the 1981 book, A Theory for Nursing, can you explain the process of the theory development piece?
Well, I think book reviews are really kind of nice if you pay attention to the reviewer. And you know Rosemary Ellis. We all had a lot of respect for her theoretical background. And she wrote a book review on my 1971 book, published in Nursing Research. And I'm not using her exact words, but in essence what she was saying was it was a very nice framework for nursing, but it needed some meat on the bones. My words. She said it very beautifully, and what it meant to me was that I better develop the knowledge of those concepts in that framework. From that book review, I decided that if I wanted my theory to have any scientific basis to it, I had to review the research literature that was related to the concepts I'd already identified in the framework. So I went to the psychological and sociological literature from which most of the concepts had been derived. And they had volumes of research on all of those concepts. And so I reviewed for 10 years, off and on, the literature, and then developed those concepts on the basis of the research literature, both in nursing and out of nursing.
What led you to the notion of goal attainment?
Well, that's interesting. I kept thinking I had a theory of transactions, because that was the biggie concept, and I want to talk about that in a minute. It's not transactional analysis from which I gleaned that concept. It was from also my love and interest in Dewey's educational philosophy, as well as his theory of knowledge, and that word came out of his theory of knowledge. And his theory began with self-action, interaction, and transaction. But anyway, I kept saying this is a theory of transaction, and then I kept saying to myself, I used the Socratic method with me, and I kept saying, but if it's a major concept of the theory, it can't be the title for the theory. And so I read, and then I went into the social psychological literature and found Edelson and Cantrill and a few of those great guys who did a lot of research in interpersonal perception, and found that transaction and perception were so interrelated. And that's when I discovered that the concept of transaction could carry the valuational component of this theory, and that the concept of communication in my theory carried the component of information. And it was when I found that transaction was going to carry the valuational component of the theory, for some reason or other, the insight just came, and I said, now I have it. I have the whole process here, from the judgments, the mental acts of judgments that we make, and our mental reactions, and then moving to interaction, which is the only way you can collect data on this process. All of the other behaviors are indirect, and you cannot get direct observations, but you can directly observe interactions. And when you move them to transactions, and that's when I said, transactions either can be the goals achieved, or if you make the transactions, you can almost be assured 99.9% that you will achieve those goals. And then it dawned on me. I said, I have a theory of goal attainment, because that's what this process leads to. And it was one of those aha moments. You work and think and work and think, and all of a sudden it comes.
Your most recent publications and presentations suggest that you're focusing almost exclusively now on the theory of goal attainment, rather than, again, explaining the conceptual framework.
And the reason I'm doing that, and I sometimes think I'm playing a broken record, I think that's where we have confusion in our theoretical literature. I think people are using a lot of the terms synonymously when I believe they should be very precisely and concisely defined to show differences. And because a lot of the critiques of my work have tried to critique the conceptual framework and the theory as one, that confuses the work that I've published. And I really know I have a theory. It meets all the criteria. The only question that is raised now is there's not a lot of published research testing the ideas of the relationships among the concepts, but that research I know is ongoing because the people are in contact with me. And some of them are beginning to write for publication, and hopefully their studies will be published soon. And I'm getting an upsurge of research. Doctoral students and master students, especially in the fall semester of each year, I must have 5 to 10 calls a week. And this semester they've been piping me into the classroom so that the whole class hears the responses to the questions they're asking. So I'm very pleased about what's happening.
How has your work influenced the way nurses think about nursing?
Well, it's hard for me to speculate. Some of the students I've taught over the years have told me that it's the first time that they've really sat back and thought about a way to think scientifically.
How does your work influence what nurses do in practice?
Well, there's several institutions that are implementing theory-based practice. Sunnybrook Medical Center in Toronto is one of those. Now that they have implemented their project, and it took them 3 years, because I consulted with them and said, please go slowly. All other departments in that medical center now are saying to the vice president for nursing, well, now that we know what nurses really do, and they have their own recording system because they've completely revamped their record system, and it's now called a goal-oriented nursing record, that all of the departments have now suggested that maybe they should also use King's theory to implement these same ideas. And I said to the vice president, I think that's wonderful because it is a general systems theory, and although they would ask different questions probably and do different kinds of assessments, because it is general systems, it should cut across any discipline that works with people primarily and have goals.
One of your more recent publications is a book on curriculum in which you explain how the conceptual framework and the theory of goal attainment can be used to structure a nursing curriculum. Could you explain that process to us?
Yes, I wanted to write a book on curriculum to give information to faculty members, particularly, that there should be some theoretical bases for how and why they develop curriculums. And so the first part deals with the theories and then my own concept of learning, of teaching, and of curriculum, and then a little bit on the role of teacher and the role of student. The second part deals with the use of a conceptual framework. Of course, I used my own. And I developed 2 hypothetical curriculums, one for an ADN program and one for a baccalaureate program. What I tried to do is to show that you can have the same philosophy of nursing education for the 2 programs, and you can even have the same conceptual framework. But then I tried to show how the content, the substantive content that is taught, and the learning experiences are different.
You've already discussed a little bit about how the theory can be used in nursing practice and how it structures nursing practice. I know that recently you've written a chapter for a book on administration that talks about your ideas of how the theory and the conceptual framework can be used to direct the management of nursing practice.
Well, I guess I'd start with the conceptual framework first, because in that framework I have something called social systems. And I have about 4 or 5 concepts identified: organization, power, authority, decision-making. And so I wrote a chapter in a book that will be coming forth soon on how administrators can use the total conceptual framework, but recognizing that their primary emphasis is in the social systems, where they see the relationship of the personal systems of the nurse and client at the unit level in a hospital, for example, and then they see the interpersonal systems are nurses and nurses, nurses and clients, nurses and families, nurses and administrators, and nurses and physicians, and all of the other people within which nursing will interact. But all within this larger social system called the hospital as one of the healthcare systems. And if everybody has knowledge of the interrelationships of these dynamic interacting systems, that we would have less blame put at any one level, and we would have more of a coordination and a cooperation, I think, and collaboration from the top level down to the unit level and back up. And so I wrote to try to show this is how the conceptual framework can help administrators. And then I always believe that the theory is concrete to me now that it's been operationally defined in terms of the process, that the administrator can use that same process in interacting with nurses at every level. And that's how I would suggest they would use the theory.
You've already talked about the use of the conceptual framework and the theory in a general hospital, and you've written about the use of the theory in many different clinical situations. But is there any situation in which the theory is not appropriate?
I would think so, because I don't believe that a theory can cover every situation in a field. But I think my theory covers most situations.
What is the focus of your current work?
Well, Jackie, I've been so concerned with what I find, and graduate students keep telling me each semester, confusion in our literature about our scientific method. And so I'm now, I had a sabbatical last summer primarily to reread our literature for the past 7 years at least, and to see if I could identify the ideas that seem to be confusing.
Imogene, what do you regard as your most significant contribution to the discipline of nursing?
Well, that's difficult, but I guess if I had to ask for the discipline of nursing, I'd probably say my conceptual framework and my theory, and now those wonderful nurses who are testing the ideas in research. That, I think, the research results will indicate that there is or is not a real contribution from my theory. But if I just talk about the profession of nursing, I have to say it's all of the students that I've taught in 43 years in my career. And some of those are now leaders in the field in key positions, and that makes me real proud.
What has given you the most satisfaction in your nursing career?
Seeing patients that I've cared for in the hospital return to a state of health in which they can function. I think that's the greatest satisfaction in nursing. And I think that's why I keep working at this knowledge base, because the more knowledge I have, the better care I can plan and give. And I'd like to impart that to our students in the future generation.
I'd like to thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview. Your responses are most interesting and will stimulate us to think a great deal more about your work.
And thank you. I really enjoyed it.
She's been there through the most critical years in our field, and she has a wonderful way of bringing her own having been there during the development of our field right into the classroom. Really makes it come alive for you. The other thing is that despite the fact that one may read her work without knowing her and think, my God, this woman is a scholar, she's probably quite staid and perhaps very standoffish, which is often a stereotypical view of a faculty member of her stature. She's not anything like that. She's a warm, wonderful human being who loves to have students come. She loves to talk with you. She's very supportive, and anyone who can have her as a teacher will learn and grow.
Well, you know, there are two things in my life I've always wanted to do, and that was to play the piano and paint. I didn't paint for 8 years in Florida here, and I just started again. I have my Chicago skyline scene that's half finished that will go on one wall. But I'm going to get back into the painting. Once I start a canvas, I lose all track of time and people and thought. And it's an image like that you're projecting on that canvas. And I can paint for 5 hours and not feel any hunger pains or feel tired or anything. Just marvelous. People say it's an outlet, and I don't find it an outlet necessarily, because I don't paint when I've got a problem I'm mulling over. I paint when I'm relaxed and happy.